So the whole function of this first 7 years is the control, the development of the life processes, and the freeing of the life processes, which will eventually more and more be used for the soul activity. So we have these four streams, and we're talking about these life processes. Breathing, warming, nurturing, and then we have breathing, excreting. And we have maintaining, growing, and generating. You can see that these forces are coming from the macrocosm, from outside. Yeah? So these forces, the breath, the warmth, the substance for nurturing, first through the mother with the mother's milk, but these are coming from outside the child into the child. These life processes are within the body. And we have secretions, as we said before, that work in both directions. So we can see that these forces, so the forces working here are anabolic and catabolic. Building up forces and the breaking down forces. The breath, the warmth, the nutrition all have to be broken down. And this breaking down stream is this stream coming in now directly from the ego. And in a more weaker sense through the respiration, through the breathing. So you have strong breaking down forces, strong upbuilding forces, and a weaker upbuilding forces and weaker catabolic forces. These, as the body is being built up over these first 7 years, you know, from the head down, so first the head and the senses, then freer in this area, the breathing and the arms, and then standing, walking. So in the young baby, these forces are very strong. The baby is growing, so maintaining means the cells are being maintained, they're growing, and they're generating the organs. But these organs, they can't really, the organs are working, the lungs are working, the heart, circulatory system is working and warming, and the alimentary canal system is working, but it's just beginning, and it needs, the child can't eat anything yet, just drink the mother's milk. The child has to be, you have to control the warmth of the child here, and very carefully watch the breathing. And the child on its own can't control these processes. From the growth comes the power in the limbs, and from the nurturing and the warming, but the child can't control its body in the beginning. And slowly this whole development has to do with the child being able to fully control these life processes and releasing them little by little for soul activities. And what's very important in this time for the environment, so this is the environment here, so what's around the child is the home, and the parents, and the larger family, if there's brothers and sisters and grandparents. And the child is imitated. Now, very important. Everything that's coming to them, they're imitating as they're building this body from above down. So what the child needs here is goodness. This comes from Rudolf Steiner. He said the essence of these first 7 years are the forces of goodness. But goodness in what's great to the child, but also in all the activities in home and in the kindergarten, making good forms, good coordinated activities, good environment, and good habits for the child. And although the growth is coming from the head down, the rate of growth is getting less and less. Okay. So the child is growing, but slower and slower growing. So the rate is accelerating. So the rate looks like this. So here's, of course, there's been a lot of growth up until birth. Yeah. And then the growing continues, and then it starts to go down, then it goes up, and then it goes down again. And here's 8 and 9. Here's, so the highest of the growth is about 2, and here's birth. Yeah. So the growth rate is descending all the time until the middle. We'll talk about it in a moment. And this is the time of the Rubicon starts. Yeah? And then there's puberty. So the growth rate is very, very high, but it's deaccelerating all the time as these forces are released for soul activity, for thinking, memory, play, for the cognitive activities of the child. And so we talk about thinking, feeling, and willing. But these are at the level of the life processes, the cognitive the growth of the brain, the imitating in the brain, and eventually the speech and the thinking. These are all metabolic processes that provide for a base for cognition later on. You take something like speech, for example. There's a time here, what is it, about what time, when the child says the first word? It's about 8 months. And this is the most fascinating thing to watch when your child, before it's just gibberish, children, and then the child says a real word. 8 months. About 8 months.
That's real word that's speak.
Oh, okay, so like a year. Yeah. So about the first year the child can say a real word. Do you know this event? Have you ever watched a child for the first time say a word? Many times it's mama. Yeah?
They cup.
Come. Yeah. And then what do? They just say this word around all the time. Everything is this word. They've now seen something for the first time. So it's not at all like when we say a word. For them, now something is taking place out of a whole chaos of experience. I remember I experienced this for the first time when I was a student at Emerson, and I was invited on a Sunday to have dinner with one of the teachers. And they had this beautiful little daughter, and we were outside, it was a beautiful summer day, and she was playing with a ball. And then for the first time, because the parents were very excited, she said, ball, ball. And then I watched all that morning, everything was ball, ball, ball. Yeah? So the world was ball. So it's like when you teach math in the Waldorf school, you say the biggest number is 1, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller numbers as you have infinite series of numbers. So the child has that first word, let's say, mama, and then papa. So now the world is in 2, mama and papa, and then another word, and the world, which is a whole for the child, starts differentiating into objects, into people, into processes. Can you see how language develops? Then you have this whole process. Yes?
One question.
0到21岁
So from birth to 21.
从大的那个图景发展规律不是意志、情感、思考吗？
From the overview, shouldn't it be willing, feeling, and thinking? How children develop. They develop their body first, and the feeling second, and then their thinking is last. but we're talking about your reverse.
Yes, because this whole thing is willing. Yes? And then this is feeling, but feeling has a thinking phase, a feeling stage, and a feeling willing phase. Yeah? And the same with from 14 to 21.
Why is it thinking really in a smaller scale?
Because it starts from the head, yeah? And is forming, the will, you might say, is active in the head. Yeah? And then the will is more active in the chest, and then finally in the limbs and the metabolism. Yeah? The will is active throughout the child, but the forming of the will. Look, when I have only will, this is only will. Yeah? It's just impulse reaction. Beginning, you see the child, it's full of will, but there's no forming. So the will is active, the will through the I, which will be active for the 21 years, but in very different ways. It's first because it's forming and then releasing the forces so that more forces are free for the next activity. So in these first 3 years, the thinking organs are developed so that the child can now think. And when I say feeling here, I'm talking about feeling in the soul, emotion. The child cries and screams or is happy, yeah? But to develop those emotions, that takes fantasy. And that comes from the heart. So the child is first mama, papa, ball, chair. It's just giving names to everything, yeah? And that's also becoming part of the memory. The memory now looks at nouns, at objects everywhere. It gives names. Yeah? And now here you begin to have the verb and the adverb and the adjectives, because the child begins to have fantasy, begins to play, and begins to see the relationship between these things with the fantasy. It's not the same as the fantasy that develops here in the second phase. It's the ability to even look into the future and into the past and say, tomorrow we're going to do this. That takes fantasy. That's not in the present moment. Now, I could have put head, chest, and limbs here, but I want you to feel how what we use all the time, all of our normal soul activity, how they're built up first as life processes, then as soul processes, and then spiritual processes. Thinking is a complicated process. Here it just begins. What does it mean? I have one picture from my memory, and I link it, I make a relationship to another picture, and then to another picture. That's the beginning of the thinking activity. When I come here, I can already do that. Now I begin to make up worlds with my thinking. Yeah? And when we get to thinking from 14 to 21, we really have to take a hold of the real world with our thinking. Here we make our own world in the middle time. Here we begin the very gestures of thinking. What is there in the body as formative forces forming the body now forms the thoughts when this becomes free here. The life forces that are forming the body, here when I begin to think, those forces have become released, and now inwardly I'm forming images. Here I was forming the body with those forces, and now the etheric force.
7 to 14 is forming images.
No, I already have those images. 7 to 14 is forming the moral, you might say, the story, an inner story of those images. But I have to be able to think before I get there. Yeah? And thinking in that sense is one image after another. If I say, you're going to go from here to downtown Guangzhou, right away you have images. I'm going to call a taxi, he's going to take me there. You have image after image when you think, don't you?
But from birth to 3, also our etheric force is helping us to think, while it stops helping us to build up our body.
It's stopping here to build up our body. Yeah? This part is getting more and more finished. Yeah? This still has to be worked on. It doesn't let off the etheric force. It slowly releases a part so that the beginning of what's needed in the next part will be developed. It's very complicated. Let me put it this way. you're building the function of thinking. So, for instance, here, the child really begins to learn when it goes to school. But here is when it's asking all these questions. Why this? Why that? Why this? Why that? Yeah, remember, here I'm building the function to be able to think. And I'm imitating. So this is actually the sense, what Steiner talks about, the sense of thought. The sense of thought is actually formed here. I'm not thinking myself, but I'm imitating the thoughts that the people around me are showing me. And here I'm learning the function of feeling. So you should always tell your children, isn't that beautiful? You should always add qualities to things when they're learning here. And then they feel these things, and then they can separate one feeling from another feeling. But that thinking and feeling is not, they don't experience it in themselves. Is the world itself is now coming into being through their thinking and feeling. They feel the world, they think the world. All things are always working, but the emphasis in one time or another is not the same. Yeah? What I want you to do is feel, because we all have these faculties now. These are our faculties as an adult being. I want you to, we forget how these things developed step by step, and how the educational process should be, and the environmental process should be helping us form this in the most healthy way. So for instance, I talk about this phase, so they start to develop fantasy. But when they're going over to this phase and they're getting more and more, they're playing, they want their playing to be more and more real, they begin to ask you lots and lots of questions. Why this? Why that? Why does this happen? Why does the sun shine? Why does the bug crawl? Here they're just applying their fantasy to play with their play. You know, there's Mama walking and there's Papa walking. Here, now the fantasy's been developed. Now they're starting to apply it to the world. They want to imagine. They could call this imagination too. They want to imagine, what is this? What is that? Why is this? They're asking lots of questions. And here, I was going to tell you, I watched this process with my grandson. Yeah? He was asking me, why is this? And why is that? And I'd say, well, it's because of this. And he said, why that? And I said, well, it's because of this. And he said, well, why that? And I said, because of this. And he goes, ah. So he needed this thought, and then I saw it came together. Yeah? This is, he's imitating. He has the sense of thought. He's sensing what I'm thinking, but it doesn't quite fit together. I add another thing. I add and now he has it. Yeah? And it's very important for you that you don't give them facts, especially the father. The father just wants to fill them with facts. Yeah? You know, the child will say, Papa, what's the sun? And the father says, oh, the sun is a ball of hydrogen 93 billion miles away. It's exploding and giving off light. It takes the light 8 minutes for it to come here. The child can't do anything. But you don't have to make up stories, but you can say, because of the sun, all the plants can live. The sun gives them the gift of light every day. Yeah? And the child develops a healthy imagination. Of course, both those things are true, and they will learn those facts later, no problem. They don't need to memorize them now. What they need to do is have the strong, healthy base of imagination to be able to really imagine what 93 million miles means. I can put it this way. Always think, what I'm doing here, the child, it's like food. The child is taking whatever I'm giving it, even in knowledge, and building itself. Building its body, building its soul. Okay, now if we go to the next phase. Now, this has been, so here, the physical body has already been formed. Yeah? And I'm building the healthy etheric body so that its forces can be released. Now, these forces are coming even stronger. Remember, right here I have the growth So it's still growing. So now this is meeting in the chest area, yeah? The whole feeling life, the soul life of the child is developing. So this is taming, not releasing. Taming soul process, soul forces. Now, why do I say taming? Now here we have 7 and 14. So here we have 9 and here we have 12. Remember, they will go through tremendous soul development here until puberty. So they have control of their life processes, but their soul processes are not formed by themselves. And here they're very influenced by the adults around them, especially the parents, teachers, and other adults that are around them. They're influenced especially by the soul forces of the adults around them. Yeah? If the parents are fighting with each other, the child can't deal with this yet. It hasn't fully developed. Later on, they do need to deal with problems in relationships. But in the beginning, they can't quite deal with it. But now they can. So again, I put thinking, feeling, willing. But these are under the feeling forces. So now the thinking imagination, the healthy thinking imagination that I've built here, now the child is beginning to use to differentiate their own souls. And there'll be a whole metamorphosis of the story here. The story, really, the middle school from 1st grade to 8th grade is really about the metamorphosis of a story. So I took just an outline of the Waldorf curriculum, for instance. Now this is from an American, so I took it off a website. So this is American. We have to translate this into Chinese culture. So you have grade 1, 2, and 3, up to 9, yeah? 9, 10. To start with fairy tales and nature stories, using imagination and rhythm as much as possible. Also, music is very important for this time. So this is full of imagination, fairy stories, and also, like I say, these imaginative pictures of nature around. How the different animals are, the plants, the minerals, but always with a story, always with a moral to the story. Then this fairy tale is transformed into fables. Now you're telling actual events with animals and with a moral to the story. Yeah. If you do this, this happens. And then the legends of the saints, for instance. So there's a lot of saintly gods in Chinese history, isn't there? So you talk, I don't know what you do in Chinese school, but in America, then they tell the stories of the different saints. Okay, remember the crisis here is the child wanting to defy you, especially after the development of the eye. The child wants to defy the parent. Wants to say no, yeah? Here, the problem is the Rubicon, which you've been looking at, yeah? The crisis here is the Rubicon. And the child is really struggling here, and all these forces in the middle region. Because here, everything is coming from outside. But now, all of this is becoming internalized in their own feelings. Their own feelings are developing, and they're beginning to feel separate from the world around them. Here, the stories in the West are the Old Testament creation stories. So you have Chinese creation stories. Yeah? And here, before, they've been playing and doing lots of games and a lot of rhythmical activities, especially learning math in this age. Yeah? But now, when they begin to feel separate from everything, it's very important to do house building and study shelters and farming and how clothing and fabric are made. You know, in the story in the Christian Bible, the paradise story, how does Adam and Eve know, how does God know that Adam and Eve have eaten the forbidden fruit?
那个他们拿了叶子盖在
They feel naked. And the young children, before here, they don't care if they're running around naked. But all of a sudden, they want to close the bathroom door. They don't want people to see them. And the child actually begins to feel naked in the world, and building buildings with them. Have them feel, I'm free now to build my own space. Also, the child might need their own space, a little bit time alone from their brothers and sisters, always bothering them. They might need more quiet time. Yeah? And the story is transforming all the time. So now you go to grade 4, when they're 10, they begin to study the human being and the animal, now more objectively, and the myths of all the different cultures. They begin to understand a culture and its myth. And this leads, always very imaginatively, this leads to ancient history. They learn about ancient China and India and Persia and Greece and Europe. At the same time, they're beginning to study geography. There's this world around them. The world has different places in it. And in grade 6, they really begin, at 12, they really begin to get into history. Not with just a lot of dry dates and that they have to remember for an exam, but stories from history. Yeah, and here, grade 7 and 8, they're really beginning to history, literature, the age of exploration, how people traveled all over the world and started to explore the different continents, and especially the stories through biographies, how individual people did things, all kinds of people, women and men, and how they changed the world through having a challenge and through their life changing something in the world. Yeah? And I spoke here about the soul forces. Yeah? Desire. And I said sensation, but this is actually not sensation of the senses, but inner sensation. Susceptibility is what Steiner uses. Susceptibility. Sensitivity. That's a good one. Sorry. Sensitivity. Yeah, because here we're experiencing sensation, and that becomes inner sensitivity in the soul. And then wishing. And I'll continue with this afternoon. It's important to understand how these soul forces become tamed. Yeah, this is taming, tame. Do they know what tame means?
Yeah.
Here you have to develop and release. Over here you have to tame, like taming animals. You have to tame those soul forces. And here the goodness in the environment is important. Here it's beauty. The beauty, the harmony of the environment is so important for these children. So this afternoon we'll talk about how important it is for the way the teachers and the parents deal with the children through this phase, and then we'll start to look at the next period.